Do you have a life insurance policy with an accelerated death benefit rider for terminal illness? The Wall Street Journal recently published an article that put the spotlight on this feature by profiling some individuals who filed claim for benefit and were declined. It appears as though the qualification criteria for this feature is a bit more nuanced than a number of people thought initially. But what on earth is driving so much complexity behind an otherwise seemingly simple contractual feature? The accelerated death benefit rider for terminal illness is a provision of a life insurance contract that gives the policy owner insured access to a portion of the outstanding death benefit on the policy if they become terminally ill. Generally speaking, the insurance contract will define terminal illness as having a life expectancy somewhere between 12 and 24 months. And in my experience, 12 months is the much more common definition used. So seemingly, if you go to your doctor and he or she tells you that you have an illness and you have 12 months or fewer to live, you would at that point be eligible to exercise this feature of your life insurance contract. These riders are available on both types of life insurance policy, both cash value and in some cases term life insurance policies, though I can tell you that there are far more cash value style life insurance policies that provide these benefits than would be the case for term life insurance policies. Given the fact that the definition, the qualifying criteria seems so simple, you have or you don't have a terminal illness, which means your life expectancy is or is not, let's say 12 months or less, what would drive the insurance company to decline a claim made for the rider? It turns out this has a lot to do with the complexity of modern medicine and its rapid evolution to change prognosis on a number of different illnesses, where certain illnesses may have carried a terminal diagnosis and a life expectancy of 12 or fewer months just 10 years ago. There have been advancements in terms of available treatments that in some cases have improved the life expectancy of people with various diagnoses. In some cases, physicians may be trying to manage expectations by not overpromising and creating too much optimism about the outlook of a certain condition, and they may guess somewhat low in terms of how many months someone has left to live. This is generally a good practice to not get friends or family or an individual who is ill's hopes too high, but there could realistically be avenues that keep an individual alive longer with certain conditions. There are, of course, situations where physicians may not necessarily have a tight grasp on everything that is available under certain circumstances to certain individuals. We're all humans, and sometimes we can't stay ahead of every situation, and so it's possible that one individual doctor who's treating a patient with a condition, especially a rare one, may not have knowledge of every single treatment available. Now, obviously, insurance companies have a serious incentive to try and stay on the leading edge of modern medicine and what it makes available for treatments in the case of extending life expectancy for individuals with certain conditions. So, if it is the insurance company's understanding that a certain condition may not necessarily be terminal under their definition, and that avoids the process of having to pay a claim, which is always going to involve some degree of financial loss to the insurance company. They are, of course, going to step in the way of simply processing an accelerated death benefit claim and sending the money to the insured. It is certainly without doubt that there are many shades of gray here, and obviously differing opinions professionally about what conditions may actually be terminal and what ones may not be. And of course, even with great experience and data to pull from, estimations about life expectancy given certain diagnoses are estimations. There's always going to be a range. Some will die sooner and some will die later. And the insurance industry isn't necessarily always going to err on the side of what's the longest possible life expectancy someone could have. In general, they're taking the average of a range and determining whether or not it would fall within the definition of terminal illness. But the one silver lining that might exist here is individuals with life insurance policies who file and receive a decline for an accelerated death benefit rider for terminal condition may be made aware of by the insurance company the fact that other options exist to try and treat this condition and keep them alive longer. And it's also worth pointing out that if you receive a decline for an accelerated death benefit terminal rider, all may not be lost. You could pursue a viatical settlement. This is the process of effectively selling your insurance policy to a third party. They will buy it for cash to you, and they do it under the understanding that you have a compromised life expectancy. In fact, they will perform a medical assessment on you to estimate themselves what your likely months left to live looks like. And the sicker you are, the more money you're likely to receive. This differs from a life settlement, which is the process of selling a life insurance policy that you own because you no longer want it. You again will get cash for it, but you don't have a compromised life expectancy. And while it's possible somebody who is suffering from some serious illness could affect a life settlement just as easily as they could a viatical settlement, you would most likely receive a lot more money in a viatical settlement situation. But it is worth taking a moment to point out the implication of exercising the accelerated death benefit rider for a terminal illness. Because I think there's a number of individuals and agents themselves who gloss over the serious implications of making this decision. Taking the being declined aspect out of things for a moment, if you affect this rider and receive cash from the insurance company under it, you are deleting some of your death benefit from the policy at that point, which means when you do die, your family will receive less money than they otherwise would have had you not exercised the rider. There are situations where this will be a totally acceptable practice, but let's not overlook the initial reason most people buy life insurance. It's to provide their family with cash they need to carry on without the individual and not suffer from a significantly compromised financial situation. Taking money off the table that you intended to be the way your family would carry on comfortably without you could potentially put them in a much more precarious situation. I also want to point out the important distinction between the accelerated death benefit rider for a terminal illness versus the other flavors of accelerated death benefit rider, which are generally chronic and in some cases critical illness. These other accelerated death benefit riders are qualified for differently than the terminal rider. In the case of a chronic accelerated death benefit rider, qualification is achieved by losing 2 activities of daily living or being deemed unfit to live independently by yourself, generally because of some sort of cognitive decline. Even though that has a much wordier and much more involved qualification process, I would argue it's probably an easier rider to qualify for, given the high probability of circumstances that could develop that would result in you losing 2 activities of daily living or being deemed unfit to live independently. We should note that on most chronic illness accelerated death benefit riders, the condition, the losing 2 activities of daily living, being deemed unfit to live independently, those must be deemed permanent situations in order to qualify for benefit. Critical illness accelerated death benefit riders are paid out most commonly once somebody suffers a specific condition. Common situations involve heart attacks, metastasized cancers, or strokes. So if one of these things happens to you, you could now trigger a benefit under the critical illness rider. I want to call attention to the fact that given the theory that the qualification criteria might be easier for chronic or when they're available critical illness riders, one avenue to pursue if you receive a decline for a terminal illness rider may be to file claim for the other benefit, chronic or, again, if available, critical, because you might find that you are in fact eligible. If, for example, you're suffering from a debilitating disease that might result in you dying in 12 months, but the insurance company doesn't agree, there's a chance that for a number of people in those conditions, they may have permanently lost at least 2 activities of daily living. And while the benefit payable under a chronic benefit is not generally as high, at least immediately, as would be the case under a terminal death benefit acceleration, it is a number greater than 0. When it comes to discussions about life insurance, especially in the context of an insurance company not paying a claim, these can be exceptionally emotionally charged situations. That tends to create a lot of negativity flying back and forth and directed especially towards life insurance companies who get painted sometimes as evil institutions that just try to take your money and not give you any benefit. And while there are certainly insurance companies who have pursued certain activity that absolutely warrants that kind of criticism, I really don't think this is one of those situations. Keep in mind that insurance companies are financial intermediaries who use scale, not magic, to hedge risk. What I mean by that is they collect what seems like nickels from you, but promise dollars in terms of benefits, death benefit. And while that might seem like magic is afoot, I promise you there are mathematical laws at play that limit the amount of cash an insurance company can reasonably make available under its contracts. And paying a death benefit, no matter how much, always results in some degree of loss, at least temporarily, to the insurance company. Think of it in the context of you have enough money to pay all of your bills for the year, but if they all came due on the same day of the same month, all at once, let's say in February, that might be a problem. The same aspect is at play for insurance companies. They can generally come up with the money that's necessary to pay claims, but they're going to be somewhat discerning in how freely and easily they pay money on certain claims under certain situations. And quite frankly, this is a fiduciary duty that insurance companies owe to their policyholders in the case of a mutual insurance company, or their shareholders in the case of a public insurance company. This all, of course, begs the question, are these accelerated death benefit riders with terminal illness benefits worthless? And I think ultimately the answer is no, but it also brings gravity to the actual benefit one likely gets out of having this feature. It is, in many respects, a safety net that exists under the most unfortunate of circumstances, which are pretty low probability situations. But if somebody is telling you that you should buy a life insurance policy specifically because of the terminal illness accelerated death benefit rider, I would be fairly resistant to that idea. We have personally sold some life insurance policies to individuals primarily because of the chronic illness benefit. But that was done strategically to try and help defray some expenses associated with long-term care. And in those situations, we have to be very clear about the limitations of those features and how they differ from bona fide long-term care insurance. Now, if you find yourself in a situation where you do have a terminal diagnosis and you do file claim for the benefit and receive money for it, there are a number of situations where that's probably a little tiny ray of sunshine through what looks like a lot of very dark clouds. And in the case of facing what looks like a terminal diagnosis and being declined for a benefit could be an extraordinarily defeating and depressing moment. But I think these situations are best hedged with a clear understanding of how these features work and what the real aspects of qualification criteria involve. And I'll also note, based on the numbers, the handful of anecdotal stories the Wall Street Journal dug up, it would appear from industry data that way more people who file a claim are approved and receive money under these benefits than are declined.